Hi, this is a video about the LAN-Caster game engine and specifically how you might approach writing a game using LAN-Caster. So I'm going to divide this video up into two parts. The first one is just talking a little bit about design, and the second part is actually the implementation. So on the design side, the first thing you want to decide on is an idea for your game. Now, LAN-Caster is a game engine geared towards 2D orthogonal maps. It's designed towards multiplayer on a LAN type game. So certainly if you're choosing LAN-Caster, you're probably choosing something in that realm. So those ideas are kind of your base. And then, but what's the story? Is it taking place in a medieval dungeon? Is it on a spaceship? There's all the sorts of questions around story. What's the player there doing? Is it a puzzle game? Is it a shooter game? All those kinds of basic questions. And sometimes it can be both of those things. It can be a puzzle and a shooter. It depends on what your story is and what you want the player to experience and how the player is going to have fun. So that's the first thing. It's just to think about, what's the player experience? And is it something where they're going to be frantically clicking the mouse continuously, or is it something that we're going to be sit back and be thoughtful? Is it something where time matters, where they have a feeling of being rushed and feeling pressed on time, or is it something where they can really meander and explore? Those are kind of your game concepts and your story concepts to work out, I think, first. Once you have that, you want the building blocks to put that game together. Now, LAN-Caster already provides you with a set of tools based on tile sets and maps. But there's also these things called game mechanics, and they're the underlying code. LAN-Caster comes with a bunch of built-in mechanics, but you also want to add your own. And maybe I'll just run the demo here and just talk about a couple examples of that. So if I start the demo, and we just start moving around, maybe I'll choose a player that's this one's good. So if I take the Java player down to the chicken, to start with, let's just start at the very beginning of game mechanics. Moving is a mechanic. Being able to click the mouse and having the player walk in a straight line is something called the move linear mechanic. If I stand at a chicken, I have an action able to pick up the chicken. That's something called the holdable mechanic, because I can hold things. And then the demo itself actually adds a mechanic onto the engine. Those first two were things included with the engine. But the engine does include the ability to throw. And the demo actually adds a game mechanic called throw. And anything that's holdable, if you stand in a particular spot, you can actually throw it. So that allows you to cross boundaries or throw things over boundaries. Another one that the demo adds is the mud mechanic, or the speed multiplier mechanic. And it's hard to see here. There's actually a better example below with the undermap. Maybe I'll just head to the undermap here. There's a mechanic that is used to implement mud, but it's actually, and you now see that the player is moving very slowly through this section. It's called the speed multiplier mechanic. So all of these things are implemented in the server map class, but we'll get to that later. Right now, it's just think about what are the mechanics you want. In the demo, there's mechanics to blow up the rock. There's mechanics to use the magic wand to change the bridges. There's several mechanics that have been added to the demo that are specific to that game. So think about what mechanics you want. Certainly go through the engine test video to see what mechanics are built into LAN-Caster and how to add kind of simple ones. That's a good video to go through. And also the demo video that talks more specifically about the mechanics of the demo. Okay, so you want to decide on your mechanics. One of the reasons you want to decide on that so early is as you do everything else, you want to keep those in mind. It's kind of like you can do your graphics, but then when you change your mechanics, your graphics might have to be tuned a bit, or you can do your graphics and your mechanics might have to change. So everything has to kind of evolve bit by bit, and I'll talk about that at the end on this incremental improvement idea. Anyways, once you've decided on your mechanics, you want to decide how to implement those. So how do you enhance the engine? Do you do it on a per map basis or for your entire game? What limitations are you going to put on those game mechanics? For instance, you could say, well, I want to have a game mechanic that bounces a ball around. Okay, Well, it's actually very hard to do that if you take all possibilities into consideration. So you might say, well, I want to make a game mechanic that bounces the ball around, but it's only going to work on this one map, and it's only going to work in this one situation. And now you've got something that you can write a much more simple piece of code for. So definitely limit your game mechanics to what they're actually needed for in the game. Some game mechanics you'll want to make more general. And this is something you'll see with the demo as well, is that some of the game mechanics, like the speed multiplier, it's very generic. It can alter the speed of a player, or actually any sprite, while they're inside a particular trigger. And you might not know all these terms yet, but as you get into the other videos, you'll learn some of these terms. So it's just a speed model. It could make things speed up and make things slow down. So it's very generic. Now, the demo game uses that to implement mud, right? So it makes a graphic that kind of looks like mud, and the player walks through it and they slow down. It could have been written easier just to make a specific mud mechanic that just hard codes the idea of slowing down. So that's kind of that, plan your enhancements and your limitations, and don't go overboard in making them too complex or too general. Once you have that, you want to plan your tile sets, even before you plan your maps. So your tile sets are the base graphics. So just like the game mechanics are are the code that make things work, or the basic things you can tell the story with as far as what the player can do. The tile sets are the basic building blocks. Well, literally, they're tiles. They're literally building blocks of how the game looks. So if we go look at the demo, and we go into the source directory. So I'm in the LAN-Caster, I'm in source, and I go into demo, and I go into images. I see all the images for the tile sets. So I see several things here that were never even used in the demo. Only a couple of these bridge tiles were used. The chickens used. So, I don't think, oh yeah, no, the dark mud I think was used in one place. The stairs up, stairs down. Most of the green tiles were not used. Only a couple of them were used. There's the lever in different places. So figuring out all the different graphics that you might want to use is important. And you can go through the demo and see that some of these are only used in very small places. Others are used quite extensively. So planning out your tiles, your tile sets, getting that correct and getting the look right for your game is fairly important to do early on. And then planning your maps. So certainly the maps are something where it's not just planning one particular map, but how all the maps actually interact. So if you've got 4 different maps, how do they link together? How do you get from one map to the next? In the demo, from both the above ground maps, you can get to the underground map. And it's kind of this idea. And in that demo, I don't worry too much about the relative position. If you look closely, as you move from the above ground maps to the underground maps, you actually end up in what are wrong positions, right? But the player doesn't really notice that. So, making it work for your game and the story you're telling, while also being, well aligned so the player has a good experience. How do you design those maps? What's the goal of each map? Are the maps large or small? What's the player to accomplish on each map? Sometimes maps have more than one thing the player's to accomplish, right? Sometimes there's a main goal, but maybe you also need to pick up something. The under map in the demo, it accomplishes 2 things. It has the bomb being set off underneath as one of the things it accomplishes. It also allows passage through the saws. The other interesting thing in terms of a multiplayer game with the under map is a player can be on one side of that map or the other side, and one side interacts with the other side. So multiple players have to be involved in that map at a given time to pass through the saws. So thinking these things through, I would say you definitely want to do a basic design on your maps before you do anything else. And then you're probably ready to write code. So you've thought out what your mechanics are, you've thought out your graphics and how they're going to look, you've thought out your maps, and then you can start to write some code. You want to have a basic idea of all of this, because this really comes into working as a team. Those 3 things I just talked about, the tile sets, the maps, and the code, they could be done by different people, but they have to have a common vision. If you don't have a common vision of what you're trying to do, it makes it very difficult to work as a team if you're having different people work on different parts of this. I would say certainly, you would draw on a piece of paper the basics of these things. It's worth your time to do a paper exercise on some of these. It can be quite frustrating as well to do on paper, but it's worth getting that frustration out with paper before you try to do it in code or in the tiled map editor. Okay, so you've got your idea, you've thought it through, you know where you want to put code, what mechanics you want, what your maps might look like, what your tiles might look like. So in terms of how you're actually going to implement this game, and I'm not going to go a lot into file structure and a lot into revision control. I'll do a little bit of that in a different video. But for the file structure, definitely make sure to have a look at the, and actually maybe I will just go there now. I actually want to go here. If I go, the create a game. If you go to the create a game on GitHub and you go look at file organization, this will show you how to structure a new game. So under the LAN-Caster director, under source, you're going to create your new game name, and you're going to put these folders in. The files themselves are specific to what you want to do, as are the folders under the maps directory, but you get the basics there of how to lay things out. So I would say start by creating your empty file structure. So put all the folders in place and things you might need. Do your research, collect your tile set images. If you need to make some tile set images, do that. You might also find a font if you know that you're going to need a fancy font for something. You might want to find that and put your font folder, those sorts of things. So definitely get your file structure set up. It just helps everyone work together. Put your folders in place for all of your maps, those sorts of things. Now, one thing is when you start testing, if you have a folder for a map and you don't have anything in it, LAN-Caster will actually get upset. So, at very least, I would say create a, as part of your file structure, create an empty map for every folder. And we'll talk below about running in test mode to allow you to get from map to map easily. But get your basic structure there. If you've got your tile set images, I would say, make your basic tile sets as well. There's separate videos on the basics of that. But just get everything in there. Don't make it perfect. Don't wait for it to be working. But if you know there's a file that's going to have to exist, get it in place. Get that file structure in place, especially for the maps and the tile sets. Another thing you want to do is probably create some sort of launcher for your game. It's very annoying to constantly having to use the command line to start your game. So an example there, and you've already seen it a few times, is in the LAN-Caster root directory, there's several launchers. There's the run demo test, run engine test. And these are all launchers. And these are for Windows. They're BAT files. So if we just look at one of those, let me just pop it open here. Run demo. So the run demo, the core command there is the Python command. So this is Py. Make sure you're using version 3 is what this says. You can normally exclude that -3 unless you have multiple versions of Python installed. But it runs the starter. Now this one's running the default game. So if we go look at a more interesting one like the engine test, you can actually run Py-3, start server, and then you actually give the option for the game you want to start. There's piles of options here. Again, I think the command line options, you can go look at that on the setup and run page on GitHub, or just use the -H option to see them all. But frames per second, run in test mode, run in verbose mode, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. So you're going to set up a launcher like this that launches your specific game with whatever options you want for as many clients as you want. The demo wants the demo wants 3 clients, so that runs with 3. The engine test runs with a single client, so 1 server, 1 client. So get that script in place. It's something you're going to want to play with to do testing as well. So it's worthwhile spending some time there, making sure that's in place. And then you want to start adding your code. If you've got your basic structure in place, the code, you want to start with empty code. And by that I mean there's 2 places you can add code. You can add it in your game folder, and you can also add it in the map folder itself. And these are going to be subclasses of things in the engine. And you can put in just effectively empty files with just the subclass code. So they're not completely empty. I shouldn't say empty. But let's go look at what that would look like. So if we go look, for instance, at the engine, actually the engine's a bad example, but if we go look at the demo, in the demo folder, so this is in the game folder, there's a client map file. And for the client map file, it's subclassing the engine client map. So all you would really need is that line right there, just to subclass it. And then in Python, just to make sure that something's there, you can have paths. You may or may not need it depending on how things are laid out. But you just want the very basic code there, and then you can go on and add your methods to that subclass. But I would suggest you get those files in place. So in the case of the demo, it subclasses 4 files from the engine. It subclasses client, client map, server, and server map. So each of those are subclassing from the engine. And then the other place you could subclass is, and again, when we talk about game mechanics especially, game mechanics are subclassed under server map. You are likely to want to have some game mechanics that are specific to a map. So if we go into some of the map folders here for the demo, we'll see that there's also, actually that's a good example, there's a subclass server map in the under map, which adds some game mechanics, like the saw, for instance. And there's also a client map in this case, which actually adds the darkness circles. That the engine doesn't do that directly. That's actually part of the demo code. So we can see that for the under map, it has some code specific only for it. So I would say, you've thought through your game mechanics, you've thought through your maps. If you know maps are going to have their own mechanics, they're not going to be part of the engine. They're not part of the global game. They're just specific to the map. You might want to put the server map in place. If you know there's going to be special graphics and display things that need to be done, you're going to put the client map in place. So those are files. You can get as much of it laid out. You can add or remove those ones as you go if you need to, but it's not a bad idea to get that in place. And then you're really in a point, just with your files laid out, that you could test your game. Now, your game doesn't do a darn thing yet, right? You've just put a bunch of files in place and maybe a bunch of empty maps. It doesn't mean that you can't test it, because the point here is to test, incrementally improve it, make a change to it, and then test it again. So you always want your game to be working. But the problem is, how do you test a game that has no logic in it? The maps are empty. There's really nothing there. So there's a tag or a command line argument called -test, and you add this to the server. So I'll show you how this looks. So if I go look at the launcher, and there is a run demo test.bat, and on that one, you will see that it has -test. It also has a whole bunch of other arguments here. I'll touch on the other one here, which is the pause one and why it's there. One of the things when you're testing, and I'll do this with run demo, is, let me just do the run demo. When I double click run demo on one computer, it runs all 4 all at once very quickly, and everything's up and running all nice and quickly. And it's great for testing. I really like that. The problem with that is that's not how a game typically starts when you're running on multiple computers. Usually the server might start on one computer, the client might start on another one. A few seconds later, another client might start on another computer. So this boot up sequence or startup sequence for the game isn't realistic. So in the case of the run demo test, I actually have some pauses in here specifically. And what it does, it starts one of the clients first. 3 seconds later, it starts the server, and 3 seconds after that, it starts another client, and 3 seconds after that, it starts another client. So all of them start at the same time, but then they pause for different amounts of time, and that simulates for testing. Now, don't do this all the time. It's very annoying, but that will help you know whether your marquees, for instance, if you have text that is displayed as players join the game, and you're going to see that right now when I run this, this is a way to test that. So if I double click run demo test, 2 things are going to happen. The first thing is things are going to start slowly. So there's one client started, and it actually says waiting for 2 players to start. Now it says waiting for 1 more player to start, and now it says the game is running. So that is you wouldn't have seen this with the run demo.bat, because that all happens too quickly. But here you're able to see it because the pauses are there. Now, the second thing you'll notice is the green text across the top, the green text in the bottom right corner and bottom left corner. And this is actually what I wanted to talk about, which is the -test option. So dash test, what it does is it puts the game engine, and you put that dash test on the server. You don't need it on the client. It puts the entire game engine in test mode, and it gives you several things that you can do. So the first one is it gives you the ability to toggle player move checking. So normally there are layers called bounds, which you may or may not have seen yet, but I can't move with the move linear mechanic unless I am in bounds. If I press F1 right now, that bounds checking just got turned off. That's only available in test mode. And now I can walk anywhere as I want. It's kind of quite funny. I'm going to turn that back on. So sometimes on a map, you just want to be able to, you might not have your bounds correctly done. So I pressed F1 again, I turned bounds checking back on. The second thing that is useful is to be able to jump map. So if you don't have your map door set up, so a map door is a game mechanic that allows you to do what I just did there, which is jump between maps. This is another map door, another map door, another map door. Now they just all look different for the graphics, but they're all the same thing. So if I don't have those set up yet, I can actually use the F3 and F2 keys to just jump maps. So I'm using F3, I'm using F2. So that lets you jump around maps for testing before you have all that structure set up. The final testing feature here is the right mouse button. You can just click it and the player will jump to that location on the map. Now, if you have player move checking turned on and jump to a place that's bad bounds, you can't move anymore. So I'm trying to move right now and he won't walk. So you just jump back to a place that is in bounds and he can walk around. Or if he's out of bounds, he can't walk, you press F1 and now he can walk. Okay. So those are features that'll help you test, that'll help you get around before you have all the structure in place. The other items that were to talk about there was the dash verbose and the dash profile. And I won't go into a lot of depth on these, but verbose will tell you, will turn on a higher level of logging. So I did have verbose turned on here. So if I look at the server, make this a little bit bigger, and I scroll up, when the server started, in this case, because it did have the dash verbose, there was all sorts of output about the structure of the maps that were loaded, what functions were found, all sorts of information. And this can be useful when you're debugging to make sure that your maps are loading correctly, the code is being loaded, things are being run in the correct order. So verbose is very useful. Again, that shows up as just a command line switch for the server. If you want the clients to also have verbose, you'll need to put the dash verbose on the clients as well. So the test is only for the server, but the verbose you can use for all of them. The last one here, and I won't demo it because it takes some time to demo, but it's dash profile. And for the client or the server, you can add dash profile, and this will actually output what function is taking the most time. So if you're worried that something's slow, the dash profile when they quit. So the way you would use that is you would go, say, into your server. And maybe I will take a minute to demo it here. Let me quit this. So what I'll do actually is I will actually add, maybe I'll just use the regular run demo. So start the server dash verbose dash profile, save that, and run the server, or sorry, run the demo. Okay, so I'm just going to click around here for just a couple seconds. Okay, so I've done a tiny bit. I'm going to go to the server and I'm going to press Control-C. And what that did is that stopped the server process. So the server has crashed or been told to quit. And because I had the dash profile, I actually get this text down here at the bottom. And this tells me that the start server script, which is how we started the server, it ran for 12.6 seconds. And most of that, it was spent sleeping. And it spent a little bit of time sending messages between servers and doing other things. So I didn't do a lot, so you're not going to see a lot here, but it'll show you what function calls were the ones that took the most time. And it can help you tune performance. So if all of a sudden the game's running slowly and you're not sure why, this will tell you what function is taking all the time. And it's definitely an issue as you're developing games. Okay, so finally for this video, it's just talking about incremental improvement. So we talked about working as a team a little bit, But I also want to talk about incremental improvement. I've alluded to this a lot. You know, put your basic file structure in place, get your game running with a launcher, even if it does nothing. You know, and then, you know, as your tiles get done and you get a few of them complete, you put them in there and you see how they look. As a map gets complete, you can test it by jumping to it using the test mode. You don't have to wait for everything to be done. As you get one game mechanic done, coded, make sure it's working on a map and just test it how you can. Always keep your game running and make it incrementally better piece by piece. The issue with LAN-Caster, or really any game engine, is there's so many moving pieces that if you try to test it all at once, you'll never know what's failing. So really try to concentrate on doing things one thing at a time and getting it from the idea right through to actually working, and then going back and add something. You don't try to add 5 things at once. It's, I mean, I think it's a key part here to all of this. Anyways, that's a quick look at how you might go about developing a game in LAN-Caster. I hope that helps. And yeah, there's lots of other videos to help with the details of that. Thanks.